The undertaker accused of a despicable act and a grieving mother who suspected the unthinkable. What she found and what you're about to see will shock you.
He's a cold-hearted, evil snake.
Are you Australia's most evil funeral director, Peter?
He's the undertaker accused of a vile act, stealing from the dead.
We take more care wrapping our rubbish to put out in the rubbish bin.
I'm exhausted, physically and mentally exhausted.
It's not supposed to be like this. A mother burying her daughter.
I miss her so much. She was my rock and my strength.
Helen Moriartis lived with mum Teresa, a milliner by trade with a love of fashion. Her life was cut short 5 months ago when the 56-year-old died suddenly in her sleep.
So I can't just stay in the house on my own. It reminds me of her.
Teresa called funeral director Peter Tsiotsis from Melbourne's Orthodox Funeral Services. According to the contract, she paid for an open casket service and a full embalming of her daughter. Teresa says she gave Peter an outfit and thousands of dollars of this jewellery for Helen to be laid to rest in. But when it came time to say goodbye, things took a sinister turn.
I was screaming and, crying. I wanted to see my daughter and all my relatives wanted to say goodbye.
The casket was sealed shut.
I said to him, aren't you going to open the coffin? I want to see my daughter. No, he said. I said, why not? He said, because the coroner has put a lock on it.
Teresa's nephew Jim claims the excuses didn't end there.
He did say that if he opened it, it'd be his licence, like he'd lose his licence over it.
When the family called the coroner's office the next day, they were stunned by the response.
Yeah, the coroner's office said there was no directive from the coroner. Has to be a closed coffin funeral.
Aged 82, Teresa says there's no way she could live with herself, not knowing why she couldn't see her daughter one last time. So she made the painful decision to remove Helen's body. Teresa was granted special permission by authorities to retrieve Helen's remains. She wanted us to come to the cemetery too, to show all Australians what really happens behind closed doors. Helen's resting place is carefully opened, her coffin lowered, then loaded into a waiting hearse. It makes the journey to a funeral parlour where a team of embalmers is standing by. The whole process documented by an independent film crew for use in evidence in case Teresa's suspicions are realised.
I can't sleep thinking about whether she's in there or not, or in someone else.
It's a painful and anxious wait for Teresa.
I just wanted to show you the way that she is at the moment, and then you can have a look.
It's a body bag.
Teresa's taken out of the room as mortuary staff unzip the body bag.
The deceased is quite decomposed and hasn't been prepared in any capacity.
Not only is Helen's jewellery missing, she isn't clothed and is dumped in the casket alongside mortuary instruments.
She's not dressed up at all.
No, not at all.
Why did she didn't dress?
I'm actually pretty upset by this situation, especially having her mother here so distraught.
Embalmer Sophia Bouabdullah.
The minimal standard would be they'll be washed and dressed, their features set, so her arms and hands were up around her head and shoulders, and traditionally they'll be placed on the chest or abdomen in a peaceful manner.
The casket's lining has also been ripped out.
My worst nightmare basically has come true, and I'm just disgusted.
Hi Peter, Sam Cucciara from A Current Affair. I've just got some questions about the funeral of Helen Moratis. You did it a few months ago.
Helen Moratis.
Her family gave you some jewellery and some clothes to put on Helen. And Peter, please don't touch the camera.
Excuse me.
She was naked, there was no clothing, there was no jewellery. Her body was dumped in a body bag and turfed in this coffin like it was a piece of garbage.
Come on, guys.
Peter, what sort of person would do this to
file.
somebody else's loved one? We caught up with Peter in between funerals.
I want you to ring up the coroner's office and find out, because they're the ones that took her into their care.
We did, to ask them why Helen's funeral was held nearly 2 months after she died. Turns out Peter didn't pick her body up until 11 days after the coroner approved her release. He then held on to her remains for another fortnight, allegedly telling the family Helen was still here. Back at the mortuary where Helen's remains are, police are called. Peter, did you think this day was going to come? Detectives swoop, arresting Peter and raiding his funeral parlour in Oakley South in Melbourne's southeast. Officers emerge with what they allege is the missing jewellery and clothing. Did you steal that jewellery, Peter? Anything to say to Helen's mum? Critics of Australia's unregulated funeral trade say this is proof urgent reform is needed.
Anyone can be a funeral director. You don't need to have a licence to operate.
Professor Sandra Vanderlaan has spent years researching the billion-dollar industry.
Part of the problem is that we don't have any licensing requirements or anything like that where people can be sanctioned if they do the wrong thing.
Landscape gardeners are probably more regulated than what this is by the sounds of it.
Despite not being qualified, I could walk into a mortuary today and embalm a body. Pawnbrokers need to be licensed, but funeral directors don't. Do you think most people would find that shocking?
Yeah, I do. I think most people would expect, for the nature of what the funeral director does, that there would be greater barrier of entry to the industry.
Dale Gilson is CEO of the Australian Funeral Directors Association, which funeral providers can opt to join. He says he was shocked when he heard the allegations against Peter, who isn't part of the association.
Enormously disappointing for the industry as a whole. It is an outlier. It is not a common practice at all. And I think anywhere where we can lift those standards to make sure everyone is appropriately qualified, that would be certainly good for the industry.
Peter, have you done this before? Take anybody's possessions?
Just seeing what my aunt's been through for the last three or 4 months, it's no one needs to go through something like this.
Well, police tell us the investigation is continuing while Helen will be laid to rest again tomorrow.